Hello, everybody, and welcome to a talk on restoring lean muscle mass, how to prevent or reverse sarcopenia by Dr. Dan Kalish. That's me. So we're going to talk about a pretty interesting subject. It has sweeping ramifications, doesn't it? So one of the strong, and when somebody said this to me a couple of years ago, and I was like, that's not possible. And I looked it up. You should look this up. I wouldn't believe this either if you're just hearing this for the first time. But one of the mechanisms in the body, one of the pathways, one of the things that happens to the human body that that very strongly, perhaps as strong as anything else, correlates with mortality, with when we're going to die, is our muscle mass. And I don't know, I first heard that, I think that's not really possible. It has to do with diet, it has to do with this, but a lot of things have to do with our muscle mass. A lot of things contribute to our muscle mass. And it turns out if you don't have a good muscle mass maintained, you have sarcopenia or you've lost muscle mass, you have some serious, serious health problems that are coming up. And so one of the best predictors for when people are going to die is how much muscle tissue they have on them. Crazy, right? So this is an important subject. It's not just about, oh, my arms are kind of flabby, I need to get into kind of better shape or anything. And of course, as your muscle tone waxes or wanes, so goes your bone density. So, if your muscles are really fit and in good shape and you're 30 years old or 80 years old, it turns out probably your bones are much more likely to be in good shape as well, because the nutrients that help us grow bone and the nutrients that help us grow muscle are very similar. And because the activities of life, the diet and the exercise that help us grow muscle are similar to the ones that help us grow bone. So anyway, this has ramifications across the board for all kinds of things, more than you would think. So if you guys are new to this is the first one of you these you've watched, super excited to have you. I'm Dan Kalish. I am the founder of the Kalish Institute for Functional Medicine. We've trained thousands of doctors now. I talk to hundreds of doctors every year. I love this job. In fact, I had probably 20 conversations in the last 2 weeks with different doctors about their practices, how to help them build. Really what the Kalish Institute is about is finding practitioners that are interested in doing functional medicine and helping you guys remove the roadblocks. And I see the roadblocks as being sometimes emotional, you know, meaning that you don't feel like you could do it, you're not confident enough that you could do it. Take that roadblock away. That's like, we'll get that one out of the way fast, okay? That's like a 10-minute conversation. If you feel like you can't be successful in functional medicine, just schedule a doctor call time. We'll get that one done with, okay? We don't even charge for that, right? Then the other ones are financial, like can the business model work? I don't know, maybe it will. We have business courses to help you guys with that. And then the lab interpretation part is a real weak point in our profession right now. We have these beautiful lab tests that have been developed by amazing scientists over, I don't know, since the 60s, really, 70s. And a lot of people don't know how to interpret them. So much of my work is spent now training practitioners in how to interpret labs. And we're going to talk about that today. I have also done research, one study. Okay, I did one study. That's a lot. It was a year of my life. It was like a year and a half of my life working with the Mayo Clinic, researching the Kalish method. Turned out it works. If you're wondering, if you don't have time to read the study, I'll give the short version of it. Hey, it turns out it works, and the Mayo Clinic thinks so too. And working now with Dr. Richard Lord, who is one of the early scientists in our field. And a lot of the work that I talk about today is in his honor. He's not dead. I just talked to him a few hours ago, but his work being represented through me, and what a lovely man. And if you haven't had a chance to study with Richard, it's really quite a joy of a person to know. I'm still in practice. I have patients all day Tuesday and Wednesday. All day to me is like 5 hours. It feels like a long day. So I still practice, okay, as well. And then we have a lot of content that I have developed with Richard Lord and our other doctors on staff and with all the students that we work with contributing. And we presented them in these boot camps now. So we have an amino acid boot camp coming up in the month of October. In like a week or two, we're starting this one. And it's part 2. There's also a part 1 boot camp. And so you can also get them as a bundle. If you want to get both of the boot camps together, you can buy a bundle or you can buy them a la carte. And the one that's going to go live in a few weeks is part 2. And you can get 20% discount on it if you type in that discount code MINI21. And these amino acid boot camps, part 1 and part 2, I don't, it's occupied the last 5 years of my life to study this. Richard Lord has a PhD in proteomics that he achieved in the late 1960s. He's been thinking about this for a really long time. I don't know, that's like 50 years. And the boot camps, all of them, include lectures from Richard talking about his life's work and how this relates to clinical practice. And then I do the clinical application part of the class. And so the idea of a boot camp is that's an intensive, brief encounter with Richard and I, that you just get something down. You're like, okay, check that box. I get amino acids, and to not drag these things out. We're making these short and intense, but it's a lot of work too. So if you have a couple months of time where you feel like you can just devote it to an extra course, I think these things are really valuable if you want to get your lab interpretation skills going. Okay, and that one's starting pretty soon. All right, so now for today's talk, I want to look at something called mTOR and how we can stimulate muscle growth and mitochondrial population density as a way of reversing muscle loss. Look at the supplements that are involved, the glycine, the leucine, the collagen, the protein synthesis, free-form amino acids, all these things. And then also the role of stress. And when we're talking about, muscle loss, we're talking about there's this balance in the body constantly, right? Where we're either catabolic or anabolic, and we're kind of going back and forth between these states. It's not unlike if you're in a car and you're driving around a racetrack, right? You're either on the gas or on the brakes. You're on the gas. Your body's doing that all the time too. You're either building things or tearing things down. And we, in general, are kind of trying to promote people building things up because most patients that come to us have been overly catabolic for too long. They've broken things down for too long. It's very rare to have a patient come in and say, look, I feel great. I look great. My muscle tone is great. My blood sugar is awesome. I can lift more weight than I ever could. I can run faster than I ever could. My sex drive is great. My hair is looking good. And I just want to get checked, right? Now, that would be someone who has got a balance between being catabolic and anabolic, right? So they've had enough time building up in their life and repairing and healing the tissues, and then enough time breaking down to balance things out. Most of the time, we get people that are way, 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 way over on the catabolic side. So they had so much time to break down their tissues and damage things and not enough time to repair. And so really, that's what sarcopenia is, right? Too much time in a breakdown state, not enough time in a build-up state. Now, you don't want to build up too much either, obviously, especially you don't want to build up too much fat, right? So, but there's a balance here between the two. And so what we find is that sarcopenia is the end result of the modern lifestyle, of the fact that we sit a lot, that we get stressed out a lot, that we're inflamed a lot, that we eat inflammatory foods a lot, that we don't really get enough sleep, that we don't really exercise properly or very often, most of us, and sarcopenia is kind of the dumping ground for this, right? So your sort of summary of your life's work in terms of how you rested and repaired versus how you've torn yourself up is whether your muscle mass is good or not. And it's a nice, simple way to look at, overall health. And definitions of sarcopenia, and for those of you that want, you can look up these references later, but I'll show you, this is where I pulled this from because I thought this was a good one, but from this study here, okay? So sarcopenia, and this is kind of surprising, look at this, sarcopenia increases from 14% in those over age 65, but below 70, to 53%. Most people, the majority of people over the age of 80, have enough muscle loss that they're being diagnosed as having sarcopenia. And that's not a little muscle loss. Depending on the literature definition, used for sarcopenia prevalence in 60 to 70-year-olds is reported as 5 to 13%. Okay, so in other words, this is happening. This shouldn't be happening to anybody ever. And the fact that it's happening to like half the people by the time they get to age 80 means that if you can intervene around the age 40 or 50, you can prevent this from happening. And it's not getting any better like so many other problems in the world. And then here are the lifestyle factors that are involved in that, again, from that study. And the things that we can do. So let me just mention a few of these here. Sorry, let me grab my pointer, because I wanted to talk a little bit about the stress component here. And this study kind of sets that up. So possible etiological factors associated with sarcopenia: sedentary lifestyle, check, right? So you want to make sure people are exercising. Major causes inactivity, inadequate food intake, check, right? You want to work with the diet, kind of already know that. But here's what we're going to talk about a little bit today: mitochondrial dysfunction, insulin resistance, inflammation, Okay, all those things that are linked to sarcopenia, and a decreased level of anabolic hormones, resistance to anabolic stimulus, meaning that person resists building up, decreased protein, we're going to talk a lot about this, decreased muscle protein synthesis, and increased muscle protein degradation. So those are actually two separate things. So you can have a decrease in your ability to make proteins that make muscle, and you can have an increase in the destruction of the muscle. So you have to think about that for a second, because they're independent variables to a certain extent. So you can not make enough muscle, and you can be breaking it down too quickly. Those are separate tracks. Obviously, if both of those things are happening, you're heading in the wrong direction. And then DHEA, they talk about some of the hormones here. So, and that's obviously part of a lot of these adrenal programs that you can do. And then nutritional supplements again, a little more research here. Sarcopenia, progressive degenerative disorder affecting around 40% of older adults over the age of 70. Pretty serious problem, right? That's the point. So now we think about the causes of it from a functional medicine perspective. We're thinking about chronic inflammation, chronic stress, and just the fact that you're getting older. So chronic inflammation, we look at diet and inflammatory foods. We look at the GI microbiome. Is it in good shape or not? We look at environmental toxin exposure that can damage systems in the body and cause inflammation. So there's a holistic approach to this, right? Where today we're kind of narrowing it down just to nutrients that you can use to crank up someone's muscle tone. But there's a bigger picture. That's the point of that line, right? And that chronic stress plays a huge role in this, because if the person's stressed out of their mind, and it could just be that they're working too hard, they're in a bad marriage, and one of their kids has a drug problem, and they have tons of cortisol coursing through their veins all the time, and their blood is, then they're in a catabolic breakdown state because of the high cortisol. What's going to break down is the muscle tissue. So we're looking at a balance between, can you build up and rebuild, and how much are you breaking down? And so if you're stressed out of your mind all the time and you're catabolic, by definition, you're breaking down muscle tissue to use that muscle tissue for energy. Very inefficient. And what does that mean? That you're not breaking down? You're not breaking down fat, and you're not using glucose very well, right? So your insulin's all screwed up, your cortisol's all screwed up, and so you have to address an adrenal hormone panel. I use DHEA with probably 3/4 of my patients, because 3/4 of my patients are low in DHEA. So DHEA is kind of like the miracle saver here, right, to help stimulate balance with the adrenals and whatnot. You have to do the test. You can't just assume some people have high DHEA, right? So you can't just give it to everybody, but you definitely need to, get that figured out and make sure that that part of the program's working. Okay. And then in terms of aging, this patient of mine said this a long time ago, it just stuck with me, it's an older gentleman. I don't know, it must have been in his early 90s. And basically we were just talking. It was kind of offline talking. It wasn't patient talking, and it wasn't about doctor stuff. It was just like we were talking at the end of one of his consults. And he was talking about how most of his friends had died. His brothers and sisters had died. Almost everybody that he had known as a younger person was dead. And he just threw out this one-liner, and he said, at this point in my life, I've lost more than I've gained. And I was like, whoa, that is so profound, like, and again, I was a young person at the time when he said this. So I was thinking, gosh, my son was just born. That was a gain. And I have new friends, and that's a gain. And, I have a career that I'm looking forward to, that's a gain. So anyways, I think about that statement a lot, and I think of sarcopenia as sort of like the physical manifestation of that. You're starting to lose more than you've gained. I mean, it's kind of deep, right? But part of us orienting patients is not just all the supplements that we're about to look at, but it's also this kind of psychosocial, spiritual stuff that if you can be in your 80s or 90s and feel like you still have things to gain, then let's go work out and take some leucine and collagen and some protein powder and free-form amino acids that we're about to look at, and let's put some muscle on and let's bring things back. So I think there's like a spiritual angle to this too. I just wanted to bring that up. And then in terms of the aging process, we're going to talk about mTOR, but the big picture on the aging process is that obviously as we get older and cells age, they start to degenerate and fall apart. And one of the things that we want to figure out, not just about building muscle, but how can we make sure that the entire body is reconstructing itself well, right? And the muscle tissue is just one manifestation of this problem. So when we're stressed, the adrenals and the thyroid dysregulate, and so that's part of this whole picture. So you need to test and correct the hormones as part of an overall correction. And one of the metabolic effects of cortisol is that high cortisol, excessive cortisol, triggers a catabolic state and we break down muscle tissue. So you got to stop that. One of the effects of thyroid, if it's out of balance, is that our metabolism gets screwed up and the ability to grow and produce and to have the mitochondria thrive gets dysregulated. So hormonal control is a pretty important part of this. And again, I use a lot of DHEA. I use a lot of pregnenolone in my practice, and we're getting that whole side of the situation set. Maybe even some other hormones that you need to do. Okay. Now, another aspect of this, and this is, oh my gosh, I got to get my glasses out because this is such a hard slide. I can't even see it. I don't know if you guys can. But at least you can see the part at the top that says mTOR signaling at a glance. And it probably took somebody like a year and a half to put the slide together because it's accurate, right? But let's just look at what mTOR really is. Because mTOR, we'll talk a lot about mTOR now, okay? mTOR has to do with all these things here. You can see glucose is related to the mTOR pathway. Amino acids. Oh, there's our leucine right there. That's going to become incredibly important later. We're going to talk a lot about leucine related to mTOR. Here, growth factors. There's our insulin and our IGF. Okay. All these things that are tied back to mTOR. mTOR, think of mTOR as like the centerpiece for a lot of these things. And let's talk a little bit about what mTOR really is. It's a very important biological function, and it's tied into what we call hypometabolic states. Okay, so we want to, when a person is underactive with their metabolism, when a person is not adequately making mitochondria, we want to stimulate that. Okay, and you can see this on the labs. And what mTOR stands for, many of you probably heard of this before, but it's the mammalian target of rapamycin. Some people call it the mechanistic target of rapamycin. I don't know why I got two different names. I'm sure there's some interesting history, but the interesting history about it is that in the 1960s, you couldn't really make this up. And on Easter Island, they found this compound that stimulated these scientists to discover mTOR. And that's why it has the name rapamycin. It's worth reading about that story. If you have a half an hour free this weekend, you just want to see some really cool science stuff, just Google Easter Island mTOR, and you can read all about it. It's really a fascinating story, okay? But the thing is that it was sort of has become, a very central player in what we're thinking about today, which is trying to build muscles. So it's a central regulator of mammalian metabolism. What do I mean by that? This stuff here, okay? All that. And it's inhibited by rapamycin. That's what they discovered on Easter Island, right? And it's stimulated, let me say that one more time. It's stimulated by a large bolus of free-form amino acids. Stimulated by a large bolus of free-form amino acids. Okay, now, this is a funny little story. My son just finished his undergraduate degree in physics. He got a dual degree in mathematics and physics. But in his area of physics, his specialty area of physics is an aspect of biophysics where they take high-speed pictures and even some video type images of mitochondria, and they hit the mitochondria with different amino acids, and they see what happens to these mitochondrial populations. And he's now going on to get a PhD at UCSF to do this work. And in fact, one of his professors in the new program, his graduate school program, just got the Nobel Prize in medicine like a week ago. How cool is that? That's my kid's professor. It's like, ooh, go Asa. He's really got his science stuff together. So it's kind of cool. I get to talk to him about this stuff. And so the point of me telling the kid story is that not that I'm proud of my son, which I obviously am, because he's doing great, and it's wonderful to see a young man just blossom. He's 23 now, and we just had dinner together for his birthday. But the point of it is that he's at UCSF. The guy down the hall from him was his professor, just got the Nobel Prize. This is mainstream stuff, okay? We're not talking about some peripheral thing that we're doing with supplements that's just isolated to functional medicine. And the reason why this is so mainstream is because people want to figure out how mTOR works, how to stimulate it, how to shut it down, because it has ramifications for cancer treatment, and perhaps even more importantly, from an economic perspective, it has ramifications for the aging process. And if somebody can crack the code on this stuff, someone can make it, figure out how to prevent or slow the aging process. And so there are billions of dollars in research money going into figuring this out now in the conventional scientific community. I just want to point that out. This is not like a peripheral subject area, that sort of esoteric thing that we're doing here in isolation in functional medicine. Mainstream people are doing this in a really big way, okay? And not because they want to figure out how to solve chronic health problems. They're doing it for other reasons, right? Now, here's, this is a slide from Richard's book, Dr. Lord's book, about mTOR again, right? And how it's involved in so many different things. So, and this is relevant for what we're talking about now. Let me grab my thing here. And I'm going to talk for a while on the slides. Then, as always, I'm going to show you all some lab tests, to reinforce what we're talking about, and then we can do questions at the end, okay? So, here we go. Muscle mass, okay? Mechanistic explanation of major depression and CFS response to free-form amino acids. So these are the roles of mTOR. So back in the day, in the 70s and 80s, when Dr. Lord and Dr. Brawley were starting to do these free-form amino acid treatments, they noticed people with lifelong depression getting better, people with chronic fatigue getting better, right? And so, but they didn't know why. Now they realize, the research in the last 5-10 years has shown, oh gosh, that was working in the 70s because of mTOR, because we're stimulating mTOR with these free-form amino acids. Okay, so free-form amino acids stimulate mTOR, and one of the things that does is stimulate the growth of muscle. It also has a profound impact on all these other things, like lipogenesis, mitochondrial biogenesis, protein synthesis for all proteins, gluconeogenesis, right? It has an impact on insulin, on all these other factors are impacted as well, okay? But what we're talking about now is an isolated effect of this muscle mass. But I just want to point out that if you're going to stimulate mTOR with amino acids, and you're going to do that to have muscle mass improve, you cannot help but improve all these other things. Right? It's all part of the same process. So it's like we're looking at this tiny little picture here, this tiny little image of muscle mass, but there's a much broader picture here that we're going to be correcting as part of this. And that's why I started off the talk by saying that, one of the best predictors of death, of mortality, is muscle mass. This is not just an idle, and it's certainly not a cosmetic thing or how you look kind of thing. This is like health at its most important. Okay, so again, sarcopenia, loss of muscle mass, is the same thing. It's a hypometabolic state, right? There's not enough tissue there. And so why could that even, or how could that even get started? Well, hypoxia is one thing, because if you don't have enough oxygen in the system, your mitochondria are just like, oh, whatever, like, why are we doing all this work anyways? Your body's basically talking to itself. Your body's saying, look, why would I take the time to make all these mitochondria if you're not even providing the oxygen I need to make energy? It's a waste of my time. So losing muscle mass, losing mitochondria is an adaptation to the situation. It's not your body screwing things up. Okay, and a lot of people don't breathe very well. Some people get illnesses that lead to hypoxia. I don't know if there's one that perhaps is spread throughout the entire planet that causes hypoxia. So this is probably going to be a growing problem, right? Not a shrinking problem. And there's a lot that we can do about it. So tryptophan depletion can, by SSRI therapy, can cause similar problems. You can have low glutathione, low magnesium, low CoQ10. Could be related to not eating enough vegetables that have magnesium. That's going to lead to a lack of muscle growth. Toxin exposure, oxidative stress load high, GI absorption issues, all these things are contributing. And so the muscle growth is just like a victim to all these insults. But again, just think about it from a big picture perspective, that this has helped me the most, is that your body will build muscle in response to certain circumstances, but your body will not build muscle purposefully in response to other circumstances. That's not dysfunction. That's your body trying to maintain some kind of sense of rationality and balance to what it's doing, okay? And then there are some particularly important provocateurs in terms of getting mTOR to make muscles, to make protein synthesis of muscle tissue happen. And one of them that's entirely within our control is insulin, right? And that is regulated obviously by how you eat and what you eat and when you eat. So very importantly, when you eat. And then if you want to build muscle, right? You can't be eating tons of carbs all the time or overeating all the time and have normal insulin, right? So insulin regulation is important. That's more the diet discussion. But leucine, you can see in the middle of this diagram here, is a direct stimulator of mTOR. Okay, so it turns out amongst the amino acids, leucine takes on a special importance in terms of being able to get this process going. And here's another diagram showing the same thing. This is more about like what my son does, right? So they take amino acids, and they vary the amount of amino acids that they're putting into the little experimental things they're doing, right? And then they take pictures of what's happening to the mitochondria. So we're doing the same thing, but rather than doing research in some high-speed microscope exam room thing with a whole bunch of studies that you're publishing, we're just saying, oh, well, wait a minute, we're going to look at these labs, we're going to see what nutrients are missing, we're going to see if there's a problem with muscle growth, and then we're going to provide what you need. Number one, that triggers muscle growth, and number two, that you're deficient in. And then that's going to stimulate mTOR, and that's going to get all these processes working. Remember, not just muscle growth, but protein synthesis in general. And then proteins that you're going to help stimulate by using, right, these free-form amino acids, plus perhaps you're already getting this, right, leucine. Leucine is really important, right? It's going to happen basically body-wide, not just that your biceps are going to get bigger, right? It's going to affect the entire system. I don't know. I just thought this was a really important study. It was pretty cool when I read it. I don't think we have time to really get into it that much, but if you guys get into mTOR, it's worth spending a weekend reading about mTOR. It's pretty interesting and it's pretty important. And this study was particularly interesting. If you ever get a chance to look at it, you can just take a screenshot of that. And it was specifically the dynamics of mTOR activation in response to amino acids. This is what we're doing with the supplements, okay? So that one's directly relevant to what we're doing. And also just to let you know, where are these guys at? These guys are University of California, Berkeley. These are the real people that are doing the real research on this stuff. Okay, now, I've already pointed out that leucine is super important. We're going to look at glycine also as an individual amino acid that's really important for collagen synthesis. And then I just want to mention, that in order to make proteins, you need all 20 amino acids. So this to me is the most important and confusing thing. And it's confusing because of the way that these subjects are always taught. And so I want to talk about this for a minute, because if you get this wrong, as I did, for 25 years, it just holds you back a little bit. So I'm just going to dwell on this, and I talk about this almost at every talk now because it's so important. So we're going to look at glycine and leucine, and we are saying now that leucine is essential for you to get your patients to grow muscle. You combine the leucine with free-form amino acids, some collagen, and a really good workout, and it doesn't matter if she's 35 years old or 85 years old, she's going to start to build muscle. That patient will start to put muscle on. Okay? And if you have a test and you see that glycine is low and you give that patient glycine, that's going to improve their collagen production. So muscle tissue, collagen production, etc. However, when you take a step back from these individual amino acids and their functions that are so important in preventing sarcopenia and building up muscle tissue, you also realize that, wait a minute, you need all 20 for protein synthesis. You need all 20. So leucine is really important as a specific trigger for mTOR, the diagram I just showed. But all 20 are required for protein synthesis, all proteins, including muscle, except for collagen, right? And so I'll show you some slides on that in a minute. So the point is that while leucine is critical to push this forward, and yeah, you're going to give them 3,000 milligrams of leucine to make this happen, you have to assess and correct all 20 amino acids for protein synthesis to occur. Now, if you're in the beginning part of your career, which I define as the first 10 years, if you're and there's something that happens right at the 10-year mark, and Dr. Timmons gave me a heads up on this, and I can still remember really clearly when I was maybe 29 or 30 years old, and I must have seemed like a little kid to him. I don't know. At the time, I felt like an adult, but I was a really young person, right? I had hair. I wasn't bald yet. I didn't even have a kid yet. I was in a different place in my life. But I remember him saying when we're looking at some adrenal labs, and I must have been frustrated or something, and he would always call me Danny Boy, and he said like, Danny, like just relax. It's going to take you around 10 years to really understand what I'm trying to tell you tonight. And I thought at the time, well, that's ridiculous, you know? And then when I hit like the 10 or 11-year mark, I still remember this too. I was looking at an adrenal hormone panel and something in my brain crystallized. And it's like everything that Timmons taught me for those 6 years or 7 years that we spent together, everything just kind of hit and coalesced. And I was like, wow, I really understand this now. And then I looked at the calendar. I was like, oh my God, this guy was right. That took me 10 or 11 years to wrap my mind around what he was really saying that one night. Okay. And so this stuff is hard to get. And so in the beginning years, the first 10 years, you can just do things without really understanding why they're working. And so the easy and look at Dr. Lord and Browley back in the 70s and 80s, they were giving all these patients free form amino acids. They didn't know why it was working. They just knew that everyone was getting better. So the solution then for this 20 amino acid problem is just give people free form amino acid powders. You don't have to research any of these amino acids on here. You don't have to understand the difference between cysteine and methionine. You don't have to know which ones are sulfur containing. You don't have to even know the branch chains. You don't have to memorize any of that. Just give the free-form amino acid powder in the right dose, 1 teaspoon or 2 teaspoons twice a day, depending on what you're trying to do. And that's it. You can get the free-form amino acid powders from Pure Encapsulations. You can get them from Designs for Health. They taste different. Sometimes patients complain about how one tastes, so then switch them to the other one. And so again, you don't have to understand exactly how that mechanism is working, but you got to do that one product, and it takes this whole problem off the table. Okay, even if you don't know how to interpret the labs, even if you don't do the labs that I'm going to show later, you can just give the free-form amino acids as a base product, and you got this whole thing taken care of. Okay, so it's not really even cheating. It's just like how to get started. So the idea then is that we're doing specific amino acids like glycine for collagen, leucine for stimulating mTOR to get muscle growth going. But then we're also have a concern about the 20 amino acids because we want to stimulate protein synthesis across the board. And in order for that to happen, you need to have all 20. Yep. All 20 required to make proteins. That's the take-home message for that whole thing. Okay, now let's take a second here. I'm going to get a sip of water. All right, so now we'll go over labs at the end of the talk, but I just want to kind of prep you for it. We're looking for glycine levels on these tests because glycine is a constituent of collagen. We're looking for leucine, isoleucine, and valine. Those three together are the branched chain amino acids. It has to do with how they're structured, right? They have these chains, that's why they call them that. And those are the ones that are the most notorious for helping muscles grow, the branched chains. And then lysine turns out to be really important. You can also test for proline, vitamin D, hydroxyproline, and then those 20 amino acids in general, okay? And now, before you get too freaked out, there are groups of scientists who have been literally running around in white coats, and I know all these people, and they're all my friends, and I like them all, figuring this out for you. So you can just buy things from these companies like Pure Encapsulations and Designs for Health and count on the fact that over the last 20 or 30 years, various groups of really smart science-oriented people have put together formulas that have all the things you need in them. So you can get started and not worry about it. However, you shouldn't rely on them entirely because you want to get your lab interpretation skills going because you can't just exist on generic products that these brilliant scientists make up. You need to be able to interpret the labs. So for those first 10 years, use the generic products, but develop your lab interpretation skills so you can start to hone in on specific defects that each individual patient has, okay? And that's what the testing is for. Again, all 20 amino acids are required, talked about that a lot. The supplements, free-form amino acid powders, it's typically 1 teaspoon twice a day for most of these products. the free-form amino acid powders. If you just want to get the amino acids replaced, if you want to stimulate mTOR, it's 2 teaspoons either once or twice a day at one time. And that ends up being really important. So in order to stimulate mTOR, 1 teaspoon of amino acids at one time is not enough. It needs to be an extra dose, right? So it needs to be 2 teaspoons at one time on an empty stomach, either once or twice a day, to stimulate mTOR and give them a bunch of B vitamins so they can utilize all these things. Okay, that's the background product. Okay, so then you don't have to worry about all the 20 aminos. And you can get away with doing this without testing, but I'm a strong advocate for labs because I feel like that's like what we're doing here is the lab. So I would encourage you guys to order labs. But I understand some of you may not, right? So critical nutrients to build muscle tissue also, either test for or give vitamin D, C, calcium, potassium, zinc, boron. I mean, that whole list there could just be a really potent multivitamin, and you got that knocked out. Okay, again, you don't have to get super fancy with that. And really, the take-home message there is, if you want to keep it simple, give them free-form amino acids and a multivitamin, and in the next 10 years, you can figure out all the details behind that. So now we're going to talk a little bit about leucine and beta-hydroxy beta-methyl butyrate. I don't know, it's just kind of a funny name, but that's what they call it. So leucine, an amino acid, and we're going to see some tests in a moment that show it, okay, can be tested. It's one of the branched chains. It's the most anabolic amino acid. Isn't that interesting? It's the one that stimulates growth. It stimulates protein biosynthesis and cell growth by activating mTOR. It also drives glucose into good things. You can use more energy. It helps your fat absorption. Remember, it's that whole thing about mTOR and insulin, and it just does a lot of good things. HMB, the beta-hydroxy beta-methyl butyrate, is a product of leucine. But it turns out when you have leucine, you don't have that much HMB. So they also have HMB in supplement form. And that decreases muscle breakdown. Primarily, it does some other things too, but if you want to keep it simple, leucine is the anabolic thing that helps you build up, that stimulates muscle growth, and HMB is the product that slows the muscle breakdown. Now remember I said that this, because these are two variables that are operating independently, but obviously they're related. So you've got the anabolic thing you want to do, get more growth, and then you want to slow down the catabolic thing. So HMB slows down the catabolic part, whereas leucine builds up the anabolic part. Now there's a gazillion other ways you can slow down the catabolic part. Meditation works, right? If you're meditating and your cortisol's dropping, you're not going to be so catabolic in the first place. So obviously you want to do the lifestyle change stuff also, but you can just use these supplements while the person's getting their act together in terms of lifestyle. Okay, and then you can use collagen supplements also, and all the companies that we work with have collagen. You can either, some of them have a collagen product with leucine already in it because one of these smart scientists running around with the white coats on, designed that already. Sometimes they don't, so you just take the collagen and give them some branched chain amino acids with it, right? So 2 separate products. And then I want to talk a little bit about glycine too. So here's collagen. Now we're not onto muscle tissue now. Now we're kind of shifting gears for a moment to talk about collagen, just because it's obviously related. You can't really build muscle without thinking about collagen also. And the structure here is interesting. I don't really remember this in school, but we must have studied this in school and I just forgot it. I think I just blocked it out. But here's a collagen molecule. And then they have these collagen, it's vaguely coming back to me. Remember that term fibrils? I kind of remember that. Fibers, fibrils, molecules, yeah. And then they can break it down further into these alpha chains. And if you look at the alpha chain, so we're going deeper and deeper into the collagen, you can see it's got these 3 little different colored things on it. Obviously, they don't look like this in real life, but it's got proline with the pro there. It's got glycine with the gl, and it's got hydroxyproline with the HYP. And every third molecule, look, well, here's glycine. Every third molecule, 1, 2, 3, is a glycine. 1, 2, 3. Every third molecule is a glycine. So collagen is the one exception in the human body to the rule that all protein synthesis requires 20 amino acids. This is the one exception. So for making every other kind of protein, including muscle, you need all 20 amino acids. To make collagen, the big weak point is if you have a glycine deficiency, because you only take these 3 amino acids to make collagen. It's the one grand exception in the human body. Every other protein needs the 20. This one just needs the 3. However, you know, that's kind of good news and bad news, right? There's only 3 here, but if you're low in glycine, you have a major problem with collagen production, and you're not going to really get someone healthy if they don't have healthy collagen. So you just want to keep an eye on that. And hey, you're going to run the lab, you might as well look for all this stuff at the same time, right? So the role of collagen, fibrous protein, collagen is the most abundant protein in mammals. It makes up about 1/3 of your whole body protein content. Is that crazy? You don't really think about it. Collagen's like, I mean, when's the last time you thought about collagen, honestly? It's not something you sit down and think about when a patient walks in the door, you know, but it turns out it's really important. There's just a lot of it. Anyways, you can read that a little bit more later if you want more detail on it. But here's how collagen is made. Again, glycine is at the center of it. And then proline is part of it as well. And you'll see when the labs, these will come up. And then I just put this slide in because I love the title of this study. Like, who uses that word, multifarious? Multifarious, a beneficial effect of non-essential amino acid, glycine, a review. Now that my son's in grad school, I realize, you know, he's been working with his research group at his old school at WashU for 4 years to get something published in Cell, in the journal Cell. And so when I see these studies, I'm like, wow, okay, someone spent a long time putting this together. You know, I have a little more respect for these people. So glycine has very vital roles. I would have taken the very out. I would have said glycine has vital roles in metabolism and nutrition of many mammals and humans. Of the total amino acid content in the human body, 11.5% is glycine. That's interesting, right? But let me show you, show you the really important parts here. Hang on a second, let me circle them. The point here too is that, remember how we talked about like leucine stimulates mTOR, but it's also one of the 20 amino acids that helps you make all proteins. So glycine is really important for collagen. It's also one of the 20 that you need to make all proteins, but glycine does a whole bunch of other things. And you'll see these effects on patients. If you have a patient with low glycine and you test them and you correct them, okay, their collagen is going to get better, their muscle tissue is going to get better, but guess what? You need glycine to make bile acids. Both humans and pigs, apparently. Well, you're probably not treating a lot of pigs, right? But you'll see people who have better digestion, less constipation, right? By giving glycine, because their gallbladder is going to start to work better. It's also important for RNA, DNA, I mean, there's a long list of things. It's really important for detoxification processes, immune growth, and all this. So giving glycine has effects beyond just the impact that it's going to have in terms of improving your collagen. All right, so quick reminder for those of you that came late, we have an amino acid and vitamins boot camp. It is part 2. We also have part 1 available as a bundle if you want to get them both. They're 2-month deep dives into this subject area of amino acids, which we're just kind of brushing over and covering a little bit tonight. You get 20% discount if you use the code MINI21. And these have been really popular and we've gotten a lot of good feedback on them. So the way they're structured is I do a bunch of lectures that are practical, that teach you how to interpret the labs. We have Richard Lord giving lectures that are profound, is not even begin to describe them. I think in this one we have 10 or 12 hours of Richard talking about amino acids. It's so deep, it just it's the best clinical nutrition information you could get from Richard. I'm the practical guy, he's the science guy, obviously. And then we have live calls. There's a series of live calls that we do where I'll review labs from my practice and help you all design programs, okay, based on the labs. So you can see the labs that I use in my clinic and how I interpret them and how I design them. And then when you get similar labs in your own clinic, you'll be able to say, oh gosh, we saw that in class, I know what to do. That's what's happening with the boot camp. All right, so now let's look at some tests. And here's one right here. As always, I try to keep myself on my toes here, and I just pick tests, not totally randomly, but I spent like less than 45 seconds picking out all the labs that we're about to look at. So it's not a total setup, you know, and it makes it a little harder to interpret them, but it's a little more interesting for me. Okay, so now we're looking at amino acids. So first of all, let me back up for a second. We're thinking about sarcopenia. We got a patient who's losing muscle mass. They're also tired and depressed and not feeling very well, right? Maybe they're older, maybe they're younger, it doesn't really even matter. And so we're thinking, how am I going to get this person to build up muscle? Maybe it's an athlete and she wants to ski better, you know, or maybe it's a 90-year-old person and they just don't want to fall down and break their hip. They just want to be strong enough to get around and, you know, do things. Doesn't really matter, right? The labs and the programs are pretty similar regardless of what the person's experiencing. And so in this particular case, you can see, and by the way, this is a Nutraval from Genova Labs. This is a Nutraval, okay? We're wondering if you haven't seen these before. Nutraval from Genova Labs. You can see quite clearly here, let me circle this for you, that there's a whole series of amino acids that are quite low, including the one we're talking a lot about, leucine. That's a problem. Lysine is also a problem for what we're talking about. So is methionine. All these that are lower are pretty big problems, okay? And so you're gonna wanna give these amino acids that are missing. Now, to cover off on a couple questions, if you find glycine is low or you find leucine is low, the typical starting dose is 3,000 milligrams a day. 3,000 milligrams a day if you're using leucine, 3,000 milligrams a day if you're using glycine. You can go up from there, but you want to be a little careful if you do, okay? And just to answer Lucy's question, the part 2 is 2 months long. Part 1 is also 2 months long, but part 1's all recorded, right? We're not doing that one live again this year, but you can buy them as a bundle. So you get the part 1 as a recording, and then you get part 2 live. That's what the bundle is for this year. And you can go to the website, I'll show you in a minute, and you can see a bit more about this. It's a little confusing, but I don't know how they package this. You know, honestly, I didn't even look at this. I probably should have, but let me just show you since someone's asking. Sorry, hang on a second here. Classes, go to Kalish Institute, go to classes, and then you can see, okay, Lab Interpretation Bootcamp. This is the new one. It's $749, 2 payments of $749, so it's $1,500. You get 20% off if you use that discount code. Oh, and then here's the bundle. If you do the bundle, I don't know exactly what it costs. It's $1,400 a month times 2, so it's $2,800 a month. $2,800 total to get both of them. Okay, and the part 1 was already done, so you're going to listen to, you know, the live calls are going to be recorded, but you can get part 2, which will be the live calls are going to be live. Okay, so you have the either option, and there's the mentorship there, all right? Okay, here. So now, what are the other things we want to look at on this lab? Well, we should look at oxidative stress, right? Because we're worried about tissues being damaged or destroyed. And we want to make sure that the person can build up. So we can scoot down here. Hang on a second, sorry, I went the wrong direction. So, oh, and I should say that on the treatment side, let me actually design a little program for you here so you can see. So we're going to want to give all the free-form amino acids, perhaps also extra of the ones that we're particularly interested in for this particular patient, right? And so I'll show you how to do that. You can also get custom formulas made, but that's really difficult, and I stopped doing that a long time ago. It's just too hard. So you just kind of make your own custom formulas, but I'll show you how to do that in a second. Let me go back up here. There's some dysbiosis markers you probably want to address as part of a gut program. It's not really what we're talking about right now. Some toxin exposure issues, methylation issues. Okay, so for this person, let's just keep it simple. Let me design a program. You can see how this would play out. And keep it very simple here. Here. So I got to pull up one of these plans. There we go. All right. So, and this is Here we go. All right, so free FFAA, right? Free form amino acids. You typically use, now for this one, we want to stimulate mTOR, right? So it'd be 2 teaspoons, 1 or 2 times daily. And it's got to be on an empty stomach or it won't work at all. That's not always true, but in this case, we want to, it makes a big difference. Empty stomach only. So 2 teaspoons at one time, it's around 8 grams, 10 grams, somewhere in this range, right? That's enough to stimulate mTOR. Then you're always going to want to give B complex with that. And then this person had low leucine. So if you want to give some extra leucine, you could. You could give, well, you have to look at the free-form amino acid formula, see how much leucine is in there, and make the total amount of leucine 3,000 milligrams. Okay, so just look at the formula. You say, oh, if I give you 2 teaspoons, that's 1,000 milligrams. So you would add 2,000. Total amount of leucine would be that. Okay, and then in order to make all this work, you want, remember we looked at the multi, so you don't have to memorize that. You can do a multivitamin or a multi-pack of some kind that's going to have all those things that we saw: vitamin D, vitamin D, molybdenum, everything that you need, magnesium, all the things that are required to make this work. So you don't have to memorize all that, just make sure they have a multi. And then depending on what the lab shows, if they're also low in the branched chain amino acids, you can use those. Most of the time, people either use one or the other because the branched chains are in the free-form amino acids, right? They include the branched chains. So that would be like a simple program for somebody. And then, of course, combining that with exercise and whatnot. And then if you want to get a little more aggressive, you can use a collagen. And all the companies have different forms of collagen, either in pills or powders. Some companies even have all these things combined. They'll have like collagen with the leucine, with the HMG. So I'll show you one of those products right now because this one's kind of convenient. I use this a lot. This one is good because it's all in one thing. It's called MyoStim. It's from Designs for Health. David Brady and the gang, who I'm about to see. I haven't seen anybody in like 2 years, but we're about to see everyone. But you can see that someone thought this through. One of the smart science people with the white coat on thought this one through. It's got the collagen, it's got the leucine, it's got the geraniol, kind of fancy stuff in there too. It's got the vitamin D, right? They have all these things listed here. It's got the HMB. It's all kind of crammed into one product. So that's another way you can do it if you don't want to kind of assemble your own thing. You can do a single one-off product like this, MyoStim. And basically just say, hey, take a scoop of this twice a day and let's see, and let's get your workouts going. It's pretty simple. All right, let's see where we are in time. Okay, another 1 or 2 minutes on labs, and then I'll go to questions. Let me just pull up a different one here. Okay, so this now is an ion panel, very similar to the NutriVals, also from Genova. And let's just look at the amino acids and see what's happening. Okay, here are the branched chains. And isoleucine and leucine are okay, but valine is low. No one ever gives separate valine. So if you see any of the branched chains low, of course, these are the ones that are key for muscle growth, right? You would want to give the branched chains all together. And every company will have a BCAA powder, and you give, again, 1 or 2 teaspoons once or twice a day of that. And that'll get the branched chains up. Okay, these are the most important for muscle growth amongst the different amino acids. And remember, we just said leucine was the most anabolic of all the amino acids, so that one's extra important. But all branched chain amino acid formulas will include all the branched chains, so you don't have to worry about that. And you're not going to ever find even, I don't think anyone's selling valine separately. So if one of these markers is low under the branched chain category, you just use a branched chain powder. It's that simple, okay? And then this person does not have just categorically low amino acids, so you don't need to use the free-form amino acid powder at all. You just pick on the ones that are low. We're not talking about arginine and that stuff tonight, so I'm going to skip through there. But you'll also see on here where it says collagen-related amino acids. So on the ion panel, they have a separate section to help guide you on this. And easy peasy, right? Here they put them all together for you. Proline, hydroxyproline, lysine, I mentioned earlier, and then hydroxylysine. Turns out for this person, they're normal, but if these were low, then you would want to include collagen. And again, either in a powder or a pill. Pure Encapsulations has it, Designs has it, everybody has collagen to bring up those levels. And then, let's see, there's 1 or 2 other sections I just want to show you that you should be aware of, right, when you're trying to build muscle. Vitamin D, obviously you just test vitamin D. But there's one other thing I want to show you over here. Because as you know, corollary of this is like, okay, well, how are the mitochondria doing? So you can look at the citric acid cycle and energy production. In this person's case, they're all those markers are fine. So you don't need to do some big old mitochondrial program. This person just needs the branched chain amino acids. So let's do a program for this person. Instead of free-form amino acids, we didn't need to do that. We're going to do branched chain amino acids. Why? Because one of the branched chains was low, valine was low. And again, it's going to be 1 to 2 scoops or teaspoons, depending on the label. Look at the label. You know, this is say teaspoons, either once or twice a day, depending on how fast you want to push a person. And then you're going to include, now you're not going to need the leucine, that goes away, okay? Because that's in the branched chain product. But you're still going to want to have some B complex plus the multivitamin. Multivitamins usually don't have enough Bs to make all this work. And then in this person's case, the collagen you could add. They didn't need it based on the test, but you could still add it just to kind of reinforce things. And then I just want to show you one more lab. These are labs I pulled aside from our clinical rounds call. So the advanced doctors at the Kalis Institute, we all get together every Tuesday morning. We've been doing this for 16 years. Believe it or not, this guy, John R., he's been on that call for like 15 years. Every Tuesday morning. Talk about intense dedication to learning. It's a really good group of doctors. They've all been through the mentorship class and they're all doing these more advanced labs. And I wouldn't say it's fun, but it is fun. It's a really good group of human beings and we have a lot of war stories here. I just want to show you one other thing on here, and I'll show you on both the tests so you can spot this, is that you got to, in terms of the collagen, remember? So there's the collagen section of this test, but remember, you got to check for glycine too. Now, this person happens to have normal glycine, so that's fine. But if you see low glycine, just ding, ding, ding in the back of your mind, it's that helix structure. It's the 1/3 of your body is made of collagen. 1/3 of the collagen is made of glycine. You need a lot of glycine then. Think how much glycine that is. It's grams and grams and grams of glycine. So if glycine is low, you're going to be compromised in your ability to make collagen, as well as your ability to synthesize muscles. So you want to give glycine how much? Start with 3,000 milligrams a day. You can go up, but be kind of careful if you go up from there because it's a lot of glycine. Some people need a little more. Okay, so always just be on the lookout for that. And that's not included in as part of the as part of that little collagen panel section they had there. And then again, if you're looking at this test, this is a NutriVal, and you're kind of cruising through. You go to your mitochondrial markers, look at those. You go to your amino acid markers. Just make sure that you look not only at the branched chains, that's your leucine, isoleucine, and valine, specifically for muscle, but also make sure that you go and look down here at glycine. Where's my glycine? It's over here. There it is. Sorry, I passed it. Oh, and look at this one. Oh, that's not good. I wouldn't want to be walking around with glycine right on the edge like that. Look, it's like literally on the edge. See that? That's not good. That's like starting off a bike ride and your tire's flat. It's not completely flat. You can still ride it, but you're thinking, is this going to last for 2 hours? I don't think so. So I would give this person glycine for sure. And again, 1/3 of your collagen is made of glycine. 1/3 of your body is made of collagen. 1/3 of your proteins are made of collagen, right? This is like a major structural component of the human body. And if you're low in it, you're going to have some serious problems, right? So we want to make sure that we're addressing collagen and the muscle tissues together at the same time. All right, so I am right on time. I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm going to remind you that you should sign up for this class because it's a good class, and then I'm going to take questions. I'm going to go back to the beginning, and we'll see how much we have time for, okay? Let's see here. So mTOR is a cell signaling system. mTOR is not the whole process. mTOR is a step in that process. Yes, that was from Mary Ellen. And then, what's the difference with the amino acid dosing? So If you give 1 teaspoon twice a day, that is appropriate for someone who's just low in amino acids. It'll replete their amino acids and people will feel great. If you want to stimulate mTOR, you have to give a larger bolus of amino acids all at one time on an empty stomach, or it doesn't work. Then there's studies on this. If you want to read in Richard Lord's book, he talks about the research on this. So you need to get to around 2 teaspoons once a day on an empty stomach of free-form amino acids if your goal is to stimulate mTOR. If you don't want to stimulate mTOR, perhaps there's one group of people where you don't want to stimulate mTOR. That would be people who have cancer or a history of cancer, because clearly with a cancer patient or someone who has a history of cancer, you don't want to stimulate cell growth. That would be bad. So if they have an amino acid problem, you don't want to stimulate mTOR. You'd want to use the lower, more conservative dose of amino acids, the 1 teaspoon amount that doesn't stimulate mTOR. If you double the amount, it stimulates mTOR. And it has to be on an empty stomach or it doesn't work very well. We talked about glycine. Is there a problem in giving too much free amino acids? Absolutely. Any of these things that we talk about can be problematic if you don't do the way to avoid problems is you do the labs, you see exactly what the person needs, you prescribe a therapeutic dose, and you stop in 3 to 6 months and retest. If you follow that sequence, let me say it again. You do a lab first, you see what the person needs, you prescribe a therapeutic dose, you stop at 90 days, you stop maybe at 6 months if you want to push your luck a little bit and retest, you will not get into trouble because it takes about 3 to 6 months for most of these markers to really change, low magnesium or low glycine. It's not going to happen overnight. And so, but however, it's very dangerous to do this if you just give somebody amino acids without any lab testing and have them take them forever. Now that would be irresponsible, I would think. So leucine and glycine are both starting dosages 3,000 milligrams for both, okay? And if you have the glycine, if you have the leucine, sorry, if you have the leucine, let's say like the patient I just did here. Here, let me show you. This one, the branch chain amino acids, this patient had low valine, remember? The leucine and isoleucine are going to be in that BCAA powder already. Now, if you wanted to enhance this person's, sarcopenia, if you wanted to improve their sarcopenia, you could also do free-form amino acid with additional leucine. How much leucine? Well, you want to total it out to 3 grams a day. So see how much is in the formula that you're using. And then if it's 1,000 milligrams, let's say, then you would add an extra 2,000. So I just have patients take the free-form amino acids, powder, dump it into a drink, add in an extra 2,000 milligrams of leucine, and then they have a custom version of it, right? That's an easy way to do it. How quickly do you see muscle growth? Well, assuming that you're doing all these other things right and you're reducing inflammation and all that good stuff, somewhere around the 3-month mark. Sometimes it's sooner than that. Sometimes people come back and it's only a couple of weeks, but 90 days is kind of like the magic mark. Which B complex do I use? I use a lot of different Bs. The one I'm using mostly now is it's simply called B complex from Pure Encapsulations. Sometimes I use their special genomic friendly B vitamins too. How empty is empty stomach? Yeah, about a half an hour or more before you eat, or 2 or 3 hours after you eat, generally, But ideally, you just have them do it first thing in the morning when they first wake up. That's the easiest, okay? And then if you need a second dose, have them do it like a half an hour before dinner, an hour before dinner. And then for the Genova Ion panel, it's always better to get the more comprehensive panel, the 40 amino acids. It's harder to interpret. It's a little more expensive, but you just get more information. If I was just doing this in the beginning, I'd probably just do the 20 amino acids because it's less overwhelming. And then for chronic kidney disease, you have to be super careful. I wouldn't know what to do about that because obviously a large dosages of amino acids can be hard in the kidneys. You have to be super careful on that. Let's see. Can you do this with kids? Absolutely, but only based on labs, right? I wouldn't just randomly start doing this. How good is a split sample reproduction for these amino acid tests? I've done a lot of testing, and in fact, like I had a set of labs yesterday. This is a really cool case. So I had this woman, we'll call her Anne. That's not her real name. So she redid her ion panel. So it was her 2 tests back to back, and then her kid, her boy, and the son is like 9. He's got ADD, ADHD kind of problems, behavioral problems, kind of almost getting kicked out of school every day kind of thing. We had his test, original test and follow-up test. And then the daughter, who's like 13, 12 or 13, we had her first test and her original test. We had 6 of these tests on the same on the same family, right? And in terms of accuracy of these labs, it is frightening. You could see the genetic expression of the problem just so clearly. Like all 3 of these people were the exact same amount low in arginine. All 3 of these people, the mom and both the kids, were the exact same amount disrupted in their glycine. They both had arginine and glycine problems. It was so cool. So the accuracy of these tests is like phenomenal. The way it's frightening. And I do testing. I've had patients where we've had 7 or 8 years of labs. We do every 6 months. We've done people where we've tested them every day for a while and just see what it's you can trust the labs, at least as they're being done right now for sure. Okay. Um, Let's see, 1 or 2 more questions here, then we'll wrap it up. We're a little over time. If you're giving the free-form amino acid powder, but you also want to give myostim, which you can do, right? Would you lower the dose of the myostim? Yeah, because you don't want to get above 3 grams of leucine, so you'd have to kind of calculate that a little bit, right? Now, if the person is in really good, if the person's healthy and they just want to build muscle and you haven't done any labs, then you have a lot more leeway. You're not going to make people sick with these things, right? Because these are amino acids primarily are just going to get burned up for fuel if you give a little extra. And then thyroid medications you have to be extra careful with. So I guess especially the tyrosine, right, can impact thyroid hormone levels. And in general, if the person's on thyroid medication or they're on insulin and you start to improve their protein synthesis, you can actually create a situation where they don't need as much medication as they did before. So you have to be on the lookout for those kind of reactions where the person's getting healthier, but they may need to adjust their thyroid medication down. They may need to adjust, blood pressure medication down. They may need to make adjustments as they get healthier. So just want to keep an eye on that. All right. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up. I hope to see some of you in our amino acid boot camp that's coming up in a week or so. And talk to you soon. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.